All right. Hi, everybody. This is Kubernetes SIG architecture meeting for July 25th. And we just have one agenda item today. So, Risha, I will hand it over to you. Oh, I think I need to make you co-host. 1 second.
Yeah, probably. I also never shared my screen before in Zoom, and I've heard it's difficult to do so. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that.
It should work. I can share the doc if you have trouble.
Okay, let me try.
I think if you haven't granted the Mac app permission before and you're on Mac, you have to like restart the app. So we might want to have someone else present it if it doesn't work. Oh,
Does it work?
yes.
Try to, okay, just press some buttons. Okay, hi everyone. So I just wanted to bring up this topic for which we kind of have a doc here. It's about introducing a Z-page suite for Kubernetes control plane components. There has been a few comments on the doc, and there is mostly 2 points that I wanted to highlight, which I've added to the agenda doc. Just to give a bit of an overview on the proposal itself, the idea is to introduce, in addition to the existing Z pages that we have today for control plane components, those being health Z, live Z, and ready Z endpoints, we wanted to add more Z pages. For example, a status Z page, which could display information like the things listed here, start time, uptime, binary version of the component for this endpoint. A flag Z endpoint maybe that can display all the flags that were enabled for the binary. And there's a whole list of Z pages that basically is taken from this best practice that we try to follow for servers that are developed at Google. So all the servers that Google internally, like engineers develop here, they auto embed this suite of Z pages just for engineers to be able to better debug what's the current status, what's the current condition of their binaries. And we thought just to share this best practice with the community would be a good idea. So mostly the motivation for introducing this new suite is coming from there. And I guess I just wanted to ask the SIG about how they feel about this new idea, whether it's worth pursuing more work on this, identify next action items. Maybe should I start drafting a KEP for it, or any major blockers that you can think of for this idea?
So let me start because it's all Googlers there. So I'm going to take the lead here and like ask questions before. And Steven is here too, right? So Steven, you and me, okay?
I also see Rian.
Rian, you too, jump in. So I guess the questions is the way you described it was it is something that is like injected. So the component owners don't really need to worry about it.
Yeah.
I mean that can we make it as easy for the components here also to do something similar? So it is just a matter of like doing an import, empty import kind of thing, and then all the pages show up or something like that. So we don't have to like go evangelize this with every component owner to say, hey, you got to do this, and here is the list of things to do, and this is how you do it, and go force them to do it, or file PRs for them, and then
Yes.
expect approvals, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it needs to be standardized, right? Which means that
Yes.
like, come 132 or 133, all the components should look like each other, which is what would really help.
Definitely. Yeah. This is also something that I kind of proposed here, is that all the changes that will be done to the components themselves should be very minimal. Mostly should be like a one-line change, but the main implementation behind it for this idea should go under component base. This will probably mostly follow what we already have for the this new endpoint that was introduced in 128 recently, which is the metrics SLIs endpoint, which was enabled for all the control plane components. So how we ended up implementing that was putting all the implementation under component base and just initializing the handler in the components themselves. So it was like a one line change.
So then the next one is like, if we do that, then what is the meaningful information about the component itself that is being exposed? Because it's like, it's layered on top separately, right? So that is a follow-up question. Like, what exactly about the component are we able to like know more than by inspecting just,
Yeah, so that will depend on the page that is being introduced. Some ideas that were shared were here. So we could have like a standard status Z endpoint for all components, which can expose this information, which is sort of common to all the components. Another one that was shared was a flag Z endpoint. So any binary flags that are passed to a component's binary upon startup, those can be displayed in the flag Z endpoint. Featured Z, I guess, is also a common endpoint that will make sense for all components to have.
The status does make sense, but the feature and the, what was the other one? Command line parameters, right?
Sorry.
So
Yes.
there we have to be a little bit more careful because we can pass config files as well as command line parameters, and like there is some override that happens. So like the computed one finally might be a combination of things. So it might not be just as simple like, hey, give me all the command line parameters, and then that's not useful information because the command line parameters might be something and the config parameters might be something different. So we have to think a little bit more about this. It might not be as simple as what we see here.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and that also actually is a thread that was started by Lumomir. So he raised the same concern here. If there's a config flag specified, and what if that overrides the flags? Or I think there's some conflict about it, which one gets overridden. But I think the conclusion for this discussion was kind of an idea that was shared by Lubomir, was that we can have a separate flag Z and a separate config Z endpoints, and just display both of those to the user.
Yeah, we're just going to confuse the user because if it gives conflicting information, they don't know exactly which one wins out in the end when the server starts, right? Then they'll have to look at logs. That's a problem there. Anyway, we can talk about it in a KEP or like a longer document, but that is something to think about. I'll take one more thing and then I'll hand it over to Ben. So the other one was, oh sure, now I'm blanking out. Go ahead, Ben. It'll come back to me. I'll jump in later.
I was gonna say my counterpoint would be it's useful from a debugging perspective to be able to see what flags were passed and understand that difference. And there's other ways that users get that now where they look at like the pod or the container spec or PS or something and they see that information. So we already have the problem that you have to understand that config and flags are layered. Exposing more information is still useful. And if we have any rendered pages, which there's some hint of having links on the status C, we have some room to add some detail about that to clarify with like, a HTML page versus like API, like JSON result or something like that. If users are looking at a human facing status page, like some of the Google status C, then we can put a little bit of like explanation there that you should be looking at the config Z if you want to know what the like final config is.
Yeah, I agree. Off the top of my head, that was also something that came to me, is that we can always add extra notes to make it more visible or clarify to the user that what you're seeing in the flagsy endpoint might not actually be the config that's applied to the cluster. But yes, the idea is to expose more information just to make debuggability easier for Kubernetes components, and introducing that as the Z page suite will enforce a standard for exposing debug information, I guess so.
Since nobody else is asking, I have two more questions. One is, how do we, when we are in conflict with a component that already has something, how do we resolve it, right? Do we have any examples of a component that already has a Z page or an equivalent, and we might be introducing something which might be like giving different information from what exists there already?
Yeah, so from my initial browsing through the code, all I could find the existing Z pages were the health Z, ready Z, live Z, and config Z, which I just got to know today. So the health Z, live Z, ready Z, the way these endpoints are currently being used is, I think we are only relying on the status code being returned in these endpoints, and we are not really relying on the response text. There, with this new idea, I think the proposal is to first have a new Z page and not worry about migrating the existing Z points. So one thing is that we don't want to break already existing stuff.
Right.
And yes, we also want to make sure that the new Z pages that we are introducing do not conflict with the existing ones. So I guess apart from these 4 Z pages, there are not more, but I can do a more extensive research on this and then make sure that the sorry, I interrupted.
The last one was authorization. Are we going to protect these things like from unauthorized users? Is it a vector for getting information so people can DOS the API server, so to say? Right. So, like, what kind of protections are we thinking about here, or not? Right.
Yeah, so this was also highlighted somewhere in the comments. Risks and mitigation. So yeah, so the idea was to use the existing group systems monitoring to protect auth for the new endpoints. This is the same group that's currently being used for the existing health Z, live Z, and ready Z endpoints today. I did ping Jordan for his thoughts on the same, and he kind of agreed that we kind of get auth for free just because because of this existing systems monitoring group that we can use to gate auth.
I do think there is some room to make it more like, debug information is useful for attackers, but like as we just discussed, we kind of already have that problem and auth. We should be careful about that, but I don't think it's a blocker for doing it. And to your earlier comment, config Z and kubelet seems like the main one to watch out for conflicting with the things being proposed here, because that one probably isn't how we would want to design config Z now, but it already exists. But for the other components, the rest of these, the endpoints that exist are really simple, and we can just kind of leave them.
Right. I'm not even sure if the config Z that exists today, is it following some sort of an API contract? It's just like has any stability guarantees?
It makes no promises, but people have absolutely integrated with it and would be broken. And that's actually my main feedback on this in general, is that whatever we expose, even if we really only intend it to be like a human can poke at this and get information for debugging, if we return text, people will 100% like scrape the text and integrate with it and do automated things based on it. And if we're like, oh, we're going to change the message to be more helpful, they're like, you broke my integration, even if it wasn't an API. So Han left a comment saying like preferring to start with just sort of text output to be useful for debugging. If that's the primary use case, I'm okay with that, but we have to actively prevent people from assuming stability there. So like we have to do things to like make it an unstable surface, like go, randomizes map iteration order, like to explicitly keep people from accidentally depending on it being stable. Like Because even if we say it's not an API, if text output is all we give people, they will make it an API.
That actually, I was thinking about that too. I think that we maybe want to say that that's actually not quite enough, and we should provide like a machine parsable one alongside it when we
So this
introduce it.
proposed text and JSON. As soon
Yeah.
as we propose a JSON or a machine parsable, I asked about Proto. I don't know what kind of performance we expect from this. As soon as we provide a machine parsable one, now we have an API, and now we need to like version it, and like these become no longer just simple like, oh, we're just going to dump out the list of feature gates and their states. Like, okay, what's the schema? How will we add to it in the future? Like, it becomes an API, which is fine, but we can't take a shortcut and be like, oh, it's just a Z page, like whatever, just dump something out, we'll figure it out later. Like, no, people will integrate with it, so we have to treat it like an API.
But do you think it's not worthwhile to do that up front alongside it?
I think it's probably worthwhile. It's more work because you have to figure out like the schema for this one and how you're going to version it and what the plan is if you need to rev it. Like, I think it's probably worthwhile, but it is more work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we don't think it's too much work, I think that gives us a little bit of room to say, you know what, this text one is just not the stable one, and like we can even include a reference in the text page to like, here's how you do the machine readable access with like a stable API that you can go depend on.
I mean, I kind of want to make this follow our rules. Like, if it's an API and we're saying it's not stable, it's not on by default. If you want to opt into it because like the visibility you get from it in your systems is worth it to you, like, okay, turn it on, but it won't be on by default till it's a thing we say is stable. And
that makes sense.
I don't know, like it's not under the normal API patterns, but it is an API.
I kind of share the same sentiment. So at least for alpha, maybe I was thinking maybe we could just gauge the utility of the new endpoints that will be added instead of also focusing on making it structured, and can tackle the structuring of it in later releases, if that makes sense. If you're able to gain confidence, introduce some set of Z pages and then take it from there.
Yeah, the two bits I would add to that are like, make people opt in. So not on by default, make people opt in, and make it clear, not just to the person who toggled the thing on the server, but the person using the thing, that they're using an alpha thing. So whether that's in the endpoint or you have to send a header that says like, this is the content type I request, like whatever the mechanism is, like should be on by default, and the person integrating with it should have to like act that what they're hitting is alpha level. That makes it clear to both parties.
And also, it should be fine-grained, what can be switched on and off. It can't be like a full toggle, please. Because, there might be some pages that some of us want to toggle on, but not others, right? So
the status Z, like what time did you start? What was the start time? Like, that seems pretty innocuous. Here's my command line flags and my config content. Like, I need to think about whether I want that.
Yeah, exactly.
Even the build version and the like Go version of that kind of stuff is like attacker interesting, but like super useful for debugging.
Sergey's got his hand up, very patient.
Yeah, I left a comment in the document as well. I was working on Z pages as part of OpenTelemetry project for some time. It was mostly interns projects. That's why internship mostly often before we were able to put everything in specifications and go through like transition to stable. So there is still a page on ZPage about ZPage and OpenTelemetry specifications, and you may want to revive it and make sure that we standardize APIs through OpenTelemetry. It may be a better place than Kubernetes. So yeah, just this is the first comment. And second comment I have is if we will start exposing some information about Kubernetes, next thing people will want is information about dependencies, like runtime, or like which CNI is installed, which config runtime is using. And the question is, how much do you want to control what those dependencies can expose, and how much you'll just call the runtime and say, give me whatever you want, and I will display to end users. So we need to be really careful of what those dependencies will expose. So if we want dependencies to expose something, we probably need to go through some review of what they can and cannot expose and how we will control that.
I really don't think we're providing an API for like, your CNI to expose info, and technically all of the downstream components could choose to expose info outside of our control as is. I'm
Yeah,
not
my
sure
question
about
is,
that one.
if they will decide to expose us through, like, if we will decide to provide this information through our health Z or like config Z endpoints, like if config Z like have config Z / runtime page, like how much
Yeah.
information we want to expose about runtime, and whether we trust runtime to expose whatever it wants through us, or if they want to expose whatever they want, they can go through their own endpoint. But if they want to go through us, they need to expose this, and that in this specific format.
I don't think that's currently proposed.
Yeah, I think it would be I think I see that. I hear you, Sergey, that people would want that. I think we would say no. Like the point of these Z pages is they should not like go down. And as soon as you make a network call or whatever to something else, like you're adding a complexity. Like I think they should be super simple, and those individual processes would have their own Z pages so people could look at if they wanted to. That's how I would play it.
Let's put it in non-goals then. I explicitly put this comment in non-goals section. So because
idea.
right now there is an open PR that I'm actually don't want to accept, is adding health C for kubelets that will go to runtime and check runtime status. So I don't want that. Like, it doesn't sound like a good idea.
Yeah, agree. So the other one here is like in many clusters, right? The only thing you can reach is the API endpoint, right? Like then how are they going to get information about like the controller manager or some of the other components? So
The proxy call, that's how you deal with kubelet config right now, typically.
Right.
You proxy through the API server.
The same works for all the other components too.
I mean, it's technically possible to have a cluster where it doesn't work, but I think in most clusters that would work. I mean, there's no reason you couldn't run like a network isolated controller or something, but that's kind of like your cluster architecture then.
Yeah, I feel like if you don't have network visibility to the component, you are not the right audience for the person to be like scraping debug information out of it.
Right. Right.
Like I think that's a feature, not a bug.
I mean, it's attractive to say, like, whenever people finding a bug, say like, go check status Z page and copy paste everything out of it into bug. So and in this case we want like runtime version and such or whatever dependent components. But I'm just afraid that trusting dependencies is not very always good.
Yeah, aggregating across binary network boundaries feels like a scope explosion here. I would not want to see us do that.
Non-goals, please. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'll make some notes here to enhance this section.
Thanks.
Also, just want to say I'm pretty excited about this one. I think that like there's a couple of places in Kubernetes where we've done things because Googlers have come from Borg or whatever and said, I miss this. The status pages are one of them. Debugging prod services and being able to use the status Z pages is super nice. And it is like one of the gaps I see when trying to pretend like squinting that Kubernetes is my Borg replacement elsewhere. This is a really cool feature.
It's worth noting these will not be accessible via a browser. So you'll have to hit them with like kubectl get raw or something.
Right.
It could be if you use kubectl proxy.
Proxy, yeah, that's how I try to use
That's true.
POC for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would expect most people to do that, run a little local kubectl proxy and then like pull
Yeah.
up in their browser the like status page.
Yeah, that's true.
That's also what's going to make like these, sorry, not this, the links to other endpoints more useful, I guess, if it's like clickable, they're able to navigate to.
Oh, man. That's
Yeah, no.
We have auth. We have auth in. It's fine.
no, but I don't. One is text and one is HTML, and rewriting like HTML links so that context roots work. Like I don't want to
That
return
works with
HTML,
relative paths.
and I don't want to oh man.
It's just a relative path. It'll be fine.
No,
But we definitely will have to have like security
text
review
versus
these.
HTML, like returning HTML from components, that I would not be in favor of that.
Which IP address? Was IPv6 or IPv4 or
You
Like-
don't include a you don't have to include a base address. You could just include a relative link.
Yeah.
we
Can
that's a
you,
discussion point on whether to do HTML or not. Whether
Right.
to
yeah, let's keep it text to start with, and then
Okay.
we'll
Well,
Okay.
that'll be discussed in the cap.
yes, yes. Yeah.
Next stage will be HTML with Ajax calls that updates the immediate.
Yeah, so we can change the configuration live at runtime.
Well,
Yeah.
that's why kubelet has the config Z, because we had dynamic kubelet config, so you wanted to be able to inspect what config actually wound up in your kubelet. That's why it's the only component that has a config Z currently.
And we totally ripped it out. So that's a lesson that to be learned, right? Don't do it because we tried it once.
Don't do it. Also, I think the approach for that one was like clever, but maybe not the right one. We basically just, when we noticed config change, we just killed the process and let the host restart it, which is maybe not what we do today.
Yeah, just going back to the HTML thing, like knowing that people will be accessing this through kubectl proxy, that means if we return HTML, that HTML and any scripts that somehow got injected into that HTML would have same domain access to the Kubernetes API service with the credentials of the person running kubectl. Like there's just so many reasons not
This
to make that
is a solvable problem though, and the Google status Z pages do this, and it's very handy. Like you can
They're
just
also in a
not
trusted
allow script
environment
tag and
in
stuff.
a way that
If
That's
you
true,
wanna
but these
do it,
are our
make it a discussion
components.
point in the cap, and we'll talk through it. Yeah,
Gut instinct, no, please.
But we can talk about it if you want to do it. We'll think about it more.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a start, right? Like let's start with one page or a couple of pages, and then we lay down the rules, and then iterate for sure. A pre-cap Google Doc seems, like you can augment this one, or like write another one which is very specific to here are the pages that we are going to do, and here is the meaning, here is the information. That sort of thing will be useful to get started on, to get everybody's opinion. Again, we said that Googlers here, so let's make sure that we get more input from other folks in the community as well.
Okay.
We should also specifically collect prior art from other systems, not just inspired by like the Borg binaries.
Yep.
Okay. Risha, anything else? Or you've gotten anybody else have input on this, or?
No, I think I got what I expected. So the next action item for me is going to create a new doc with the explicit endpoints that I'm planning to add in alpha, and all the discussion points regarding non-goals highlighted there.
Okay.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you very much. I think that's the end of our agenda. Unless somebody has something else they want to discuss, let's call it and get back half an hour. All right. That's it then. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone.